So I suppose I should keep quiet, not spoil the intro. What are they saying about us, Nico? Okay then. Thanks. We'll never know what the intro was. I hope you were saying nice things about us. But anyway, thanks for the opportunity to talk about this topic. So we're going to speak about Google Analytics for learning analytics, and hopefully you've got some familiarization with both of these areas. But if not, we'll go through that and give you a sense. So let's, just in case we haven't got the full introductions, let's just start with who I am. So my name's Martin Hawksey. My day job is with the Association for Learning Technology. So my background is actually as a learning technologist, and around 2012, one of the areas I was really interested in was massive open online courses, and as part of that, I was following quite closely the work that George Siemens was doing in massive open online courses. At the same time, he was also doing work in this area of learning analytics. So that's where I started getting interested in what you can do. The side story to all this is, as well as the day job, I've been messing around in Google Apps for a number of years, and a particular product called Google Apps Script, and I was using that to pull data in to analyze. And as part of that, Google have a Google Developers Experts program. So Google identify people within the community that are doing interesting things with our products, and we get pulled in or offered to join a program with other experts and other products. So we're not affiliated to Google in any way, but the great thing is we get to meet up occasionally, and this is where my partner in crime, Nico, comes in. So Nico, his product expertise is Google Analytics, which obviously fits in nicely to this presentation. So Nico, do you want to say a couple of words about yourself?
All right. Yeah, definitely. Thanks, Martin. So as he mentioned, I'm a Google developer expert for Google Analytics. My background is in mostly actually went to school on the business side, specializing in marketing, but kind of grew up with computers, grew up building things, kind of that hacker maker mindset. and I realized that I loved understanding engagement and the behavioral economics side of the marketing world, and kind of drifted to the technical side. And I'm now an analytics developer and technical analytics consultant for Analytics Demystified, which is a small boutique consultancy in the U.S. But I've had the privilege of working with everything from small mom and pop shops to massive companies like Google, Amway Corporation, and everything basically in between. I kind of focus on the tracking the untrackable. So when people want to understand how something's happening or how a test is working, or just basically like really connecting all the dots, tying online systems to offline systems, being able to figure out pretty good ROI for billboards or for commercials, things that don't really have a web connection. That's what I kind of geek out to and really specialize in. So there's that natural integration with learning analytics, because it's that same kind of behavioral economics approach, is understanding kind of what people are doing on the site, and then taking that. So if they're doing things, answering things correctly, what did they do before that? Is there a material that they're seeing or missing that could help with the deeper understanding of how they're interacting with online courses?
So that leads in nicely to just contextualizing what we're interested in talking about today. So it's very much looking at how data can be used to answer questions, to actually give you some sort of insight into what you're doing in terms of learning and teaching. This is kind of the widely accepted definition of learning analytics. And one of the key things I think about this definition is it's a never-ending story. It's all about this continual refinement, looking at the results you're getting, trying to improve the environments that you're creating for students and learners, and so it never stops. So I think this kind of, you can see how, if you've got any sort of degree of familiarity with Google Analytics, and if not, we'll go into that. Hopefully you can see how this terminology as well also kind of echoes what's achievable in Google Analytics. So they're essentially, I think, a very good partnership. So this is a slide I use quite often at presentations, and it just shows the hierarchy of some of the things going on here. So obviously, if you want to do something around analytics, you obviously need data to do something, and obviously I've really simplified this into in terms of where the data is, what it sits, what format. All these questions are there. Does it need cleaning up, refinement, that sort of thing? And again, analytics. Again, this whole wedge. It's very dependent on your data. And again, there's a lot of processes and opportunities in terms of what you do. And the final bit is the action. So it's trying to make something better, or provide feedback to someone to improve something. I think one of the things that is quite often missed, though, when you start approaching learning analytics, is actually having that question, because for granted, there will be situations where you're just exploring data without a question, and so I think that is valuable. But I think quite often people don't start with a question, and I think that creates more issues for them further down the line, because really the question can actually shape the data that you want to collect. So if you're not getting the data that will answer your question, you're always going to struggle. And we have this forest of questions and data, and there's some overlap in terms of what you're doing. So I think initially when you're tackling this area, there's a lot to take on. So just moving on. So I think it's quite useful to actually have an example of learning analytics, just so you can get in your mind. One thing I should say about learning analytics is that whilst it's quite a recent fields coming together. I think 2011 was the first conference. It draws on disciplines that have been well researched for a number of years. So one aspect of learning analytics is social network analysis, which has been around for 100 years. So there are lots of things potentially you're already doing that up until 2011 wouldn't be categorized as learning analytics, but they can now. So here's, I think, quite an interesting example that has come out of edX. So edX is another open course platform, so they obviously use a lot of videos in terms of presenting content to learners. And what they wanted to do was actually use all the data that they were recording in terms of the length of videos that learners were watching and how they performed in assessments, to actually find what was this kind of magic number in terms of length of video that people got all that they needed and they were able to pass the quiz at the end. And so I think this is based on a large number of courses, and a lot of work has gone into refining click log data, doing the analysis to get this graph, and they've got this magic number of 6 to 8 minutes. So Nico, I'm afraid everyone has stopped watching the recording of this, so we'll just have to chunk it up later. I think this is quite a nice example of what you can do, and so obviously this analytic now provides edX with some guidance in terms of how long they should make their videos. This sort of thing, you do find it in other platforms already. So here's an example from YouTube. So if you have a YouTube channel, you put videos up, you get analytics built in. One of the issues or challenges with this is Google providing their interpretation of the data. So they're creating graphs that are meaningful for them, but not necessarily meaningful for the viewer. So I've used these a couple of times, and you've got this kind of retention graph, but I still don't know what it entirely means. I can see spikes in the data, but the numbers don't really add up in my mind. So this is where something like Google Analytics, I think, can be helpful, because the way it's structured and created, you have a lot of control and ownership of how the data is collected and how the data can be presented. So I think it potentially makes it more meaningful. So there are kind of 3 aspects to this which kind of going to shape our talk. So we're going to talk about data collection, so the techniques within Google Analytics that are there to actually collect data. We're going to talk about connection. So this is always a challenge I find when you're dealing with learning analytics, is actually giving people access to the data when they need it and in a timely, useful way. And also back to this idea of continually refining what we're doing. So we're using the insight that we get to make something better. So Nico, I don't know if you want to take it from here and just introduce us all to Google Analytics.
Yeah, I'd love to. So Google Analytics, you can get to if you just basically search for Google Analytics, or it's analytics.google.com. But next slide. So Google Analytics was actually acquired in 2005 by Google, and it used to cost $500 a month when it was Urchin Analytics. And when Google bought it, they decided to make it free because they wanted to show people how much benefit they can make from the web. So instead of still charging it and costing, when people would probably still to this day pay $500 a month for a program as this robust, they realized that it's easier to really make money in the long run when we show people the benefits of web tracking. So now, fast forward 10 years, it's a lot more robust, lot fuller. There's free and enterprise versions. Most of the people that use it use the free version, and all blogs websites, anything like that can use it. You can go sign up for an account, get all access. It's primarily used for websites and mobile apps. There is a mobile SDK that you can basically install into your mobile apps. And then in 2012, it kind of adopted this customer-centric approach, where it went from thinking about just page views and traffic metrics to really user metrics. So really understanding what users are doing on the website, how they're engaging with different things. And it also involves some pretty advanced features such as sequential analysis, lots of segmenting, cohort analysis, and has a A/B testing and multivariate testing platform built in. And on top of that, there's about 400 plus dimensions and metrics. And when I say dimensions and metrics, I'm going to be referring to them a lot. You can think about dimensions as anything that you will pivot numbers by. Another easier way is metrics are always numbers, dimensions don't have to be. So dimensions are like page names, location, date, time of day, and metrics would be page views, unique users, things along those aspects. So it collects a ton of data on the software you're using, the system requirements that you have, the browser using, all this information just naturally when you send these hits to Google Analytics. Next slide. And as I mentioned, this is the first website, the old Stern site, and when Google Analytics came out, also referred to as GA, which I will try not to say because it gets confusing, but if I stumble over, GA means Google Analytics. Where Google Analytics started, it was all about page views and just traffic sources. And this is when tracking was pretty easy. We could see people come to the site and see a couple of pages they view, but if you really look at the history of it, next slide, since this day, tracking has gotten a lot more complex, and now we have to start thinking beyond page views. Next slide. Because, the web has gotten a lot cooler and a lot better. We have JavaScript frameworks now, like Node.js and Angular. Chrome has a ton of amazing features that will allow a web app to almost act like a native app. We have all kinds of embeddable content that we have, YouTube, SoundCloud, Vimeo, Wistia, all these things that we're putting on our websites, plus the addition of HTML5, CSS3, that are allowing for more animations. The day of the Flash is fortunately kind of over. Me learning ActionScript back about 5-6 years ago was a waste apparently, because HTML took over. But it's good. It's for the betterment of the internet. Next slide. But with all these new advanced features, tracking got more advanced. And there's a lot more things that we have to think about and we have to know about, and that we can track. And with more things that we want to track, makes more technical issues, more technical changes. But that is something that thinking through the process, like Martin said, making sure that you have these questions will kind of make that system easier. Good. Next slide. Because if we look, these are 3 different screenshots. One is just a edX video. One is the form on the RMIT admissions page, and one is my blog. So these are, if you go to these pages, this is all one page view, each of these. But look at how many things I can interact with. Page views just don't really cut it anymore like we used to. There's so much engagement that we could miss out if we're just looking at page views. On that same problem, there's sometimes too much engagement. There's too many things to track. So really fine-tuning and figuring out what does engagement mean to you? What problems are you trying to solve with learning analytics? Or one of the questions I always kind of tell my team or any of my clients is, what keeps you up at night? Don't think about tracking, don't think about analytics, but just tell me what are questions that you don't know the answer to that bother you. Let's start from there and work backwards and figure out what we need to track to get that answer, instead of track everything on the page. And then next slide. And then it kind of goes into understanding engagement. And there's 2 main tracking features in Google Analytics. There's a lot of other secondary ones, but we're going to talk about mostly like page views and events. And the next one, as I just alluded to, is event tracking. I use this all the time. I call it the James Bond of tracking because it's so easy to use, so easy to set up, but it can really handle anything. You can connect it to third-party APIs. You can track all kinds of different activities that happen on your site, and even build your own kind of metrics and algorithms that look for a sequence of events that happen and track them that way. So event tracking, you go next slide. Basically, like I said, allows you to track when someone fires off a piece of code, when someone does something, when they complete an action, when they click on a button, submit a form, all things that don't really require a page load. And as you can see, it allows you to pass 3 or 4 types of custom information. The first is send an event. Those are standard. You don't want to change those. But category, action, label, and value are up to you. And that's how you can think about bundling your events of what they would look like, and how you would get that raw data. And as Martin mentioned about the problem with the YouTube analytics is it kind of gives you this pre-processed data. This, we're tracking those points. So someone clicks on a button, fires. Someone clicks on a button, fires. And with that, you can really customize how you want to clean your data. Next slide. And so if there's any technical people in the room at RMIT, this is just to show you an example of how easy it is to send off a event for a button click. So I'm just clicking on that button, hello world, and then it triggers this event handler in jQuery and fires off this method. And as you can see, it's basically button, I customized the name category, click is the action, and then label hello world, and I made it a value of 1. So just one simple line of code, we can start seeing more and more what people are doing and understanding what's happening, and then we can kind of understand why they're doing it or what they did before it or after it that could have affected their learning experience. Next slide. And here's another example that for online questions, online quizzes that you could push out. It's simple event tracking, but we would maybe set the category to the term and the class, the test and the number. The action could be multi-choice section, and the value or the label could be the answer 21, and then you can set the value of these different things, different point structures that could affect how you guys are setting up and grading. Good. Next slide. And then this is, I don't know if you want to mention this, Martin.
Yeah. So this was an example I put together. So basically using an MCQ and just labeling the action if someone's got the right answer or the wrong answer, and immediately you can start seeing if there are questions that people are regularly getting wrong. So this is really just a very basic example of how this concept of tracking events can actually be used within a learning concept, a learning scenario. So there's so much more that you can potentially do with this. So Nico, I'll just hand back to you for YouTube.
And yeah, as we mentioned for the YouTube video, there's these things. Well, all things that you embed, like from Wistia, from Vimeo, from YouTube, a lot of them have player APIs. And with player APIs, we can basically listen for different events that are happening. This is a common developer feature, but I still don't see enough people kind of tap into these features for analytics. And I linked down here, which I'm sure we're going to share our copy of our slide deck that you guys can reference if you want to set any of this up. But basically, you can see when people press play, when people press pause, things like that on YouTube embeds or Wistia, things like that. If you have any media players that you guys use, if you just search for basically the name of the media player and player API, most likely, if it's a mainstream one, it will have a player API that your development team could then tap into, and you could really create your own tracking around the YouTube analytics that you want, and how you want the data processed and analyzed, compared to the pre-built system that they give you for just the YouTube site. Next slide.
And so yeah, linking this back to the edX example, so they were analyzing the data from log data. So this is basically server log data, but it's not, as Nico mentioned, if you're embedding YouTube players into your web page, it's quite easy to start building those very simple, a couple lines of code. You can dig out how far someone got into the video, and so report that data into Google Analytics and do an analysis. Similarly, this was an example from Coursera, so where we mentioned the MCQ example there of just identifying commonly wrong answers, and this was a problem that Coursera had in one of their courses. They'd actually set one of the questions wrong, so these crosses are where lots of people are getting one of the responses wrong, and it was because the question was wrong. And we'll later on we'll show you how you can do this in a very scalable way.
But we have all these data points we're talking about, collecting them, but really we still get these advanced questions. The more advanced sites we create, the more advanced actions people take, and then the more advanced analysis and questions. But that's one of the great things about Google Analytics, is it allows you to do sequential analysis and kind of segmented analysis, where you could really see on an aggregate of all your users that are interacting with the video, how many people watch a video for more than 50% of the time. And as we mentioned a couple of times, I think it's big to build the hypothesis approach and test against it. It makes it a lot easier for analysis to really dig in and find those answers. So here's a couple of questions that I thought could fit, that are similar to projects I've worked on, where we could see how many people did X and then what they do after. So how many people watched the video for less than 50% of the time and then answered 75% of the questions correct? How many people got question 5 wrong, and what browser are they using? If you're using any new piece of technology and worried that some of your students might be on Firefox or older versions of Internet Explorer, things like that, these can also help you with that to see, is there a pattern on the technology side? Is there a pattern on when things are being pushed out? Also, what are the average scores of desktop computers compared to tablet computers? Trying to see is, how is your media and how is your content being absorbed the best? It might be that you see, phones have the lowest kind of scores because people are doing out and about, or maybe the content's not loading correctly. Desktop computers for maybe more visual programs have more kind of multimedia. It's better for a bigger screen. So all of these kind of answers that we can get to with just event tracking and using some core features of Google Analytics, like their segments and cohorts analysis.
So at this point, it's probably just worth underlining that Google Analytics, so a lot of learning analytics that's going on now is very much focused on the individual, and that's just not feasible within Google Analytics, and we'll explain why in a second. So it's very much about understanding how groups of learners are performing, and even within a cohort of a class, you can break down that group into different segments and get some of the answers to the questions that you want solved. The other thing is that, Google Analytics, it's using browser technology to basically know what an individual coming back to a site after a period of time. So that it enables you to associate the data with individuals, and we can explain how you can do that more closely. But all the time, I know privacy is a big concern within learning analytics, and I think actually Google Analytics is a good solution because you can't push identifiable information, user identifiable information into Google Analytics. But Nico, I'll hand back to you for next slide.
Yeah, well, this is just an example of all the different information that it collects automatically for websites, and there's a ton more. There's all I can fit on the page to give you a feel of, I can see what browser people are on, what browser version, what operating system, what location, region, and this is all from getting people from the IP addresses. So if they have an IP blocker, if they have any privacy blockers, we won't be able to track them, but it's it's still worth the looking at and using this tool. Plus, it has a ton of metrics it makes by itself by page views per session. So how many pages does someone view on average when they come there? How long do they spend on the site? What pages are they exiting the most frequently to see, are people getting caught up or are people getting lost in an area? But there's a ton of more information out there that we can provide, or if you search for dimensions and metrics, Google Analytics, you'll see the list of everything that they collect. I guess the next slide.
Yeah. So as we mentioned, this is it's baked into Google Analytics. You can't push in personally identifiable information into Google Analytics. It's in the terms of the service, but that doesn't actually stop you from, as I mentioned, using an ID to associate with a person when they log in. So I'm going to hand back to Nico, who's going to mention something really cool about Google Analytics, which is quite a more recent development, which is the measurement protocol, where we can really start using that feature.
So I'll break the measurement protocol in a technical jargon allows us to send data to Google Analytics via HTTP requests. Basically, we're allowed to now send data to GA, to Google Analytics, from places besides websites and mobile apps. Basically, we can use Google Analytics as our data collection, data visualization kind of app center, and really collect other things that are happening. Next slide. A couple examples are smart TV apps. I've seen people who are building smart TV apps for Sony TVs or things that are not Google TV, not Apple TV, so they don't have this pre-built system, but they're actually just using the measurement protocol because you can attach the same amount of parameters and the same amount of information in those hits as GA hits. Google Analytics actually was rebuilt about 3 years ago, so everything really goes through the measurement protocol. So you could almost build your own tracking SDK or tracking collection that will send information and act however you want. If it's for a kiosk, for sign-in, if you have any class sign-in devices. Point of sale systems are really interesting because you can tie together online purchases with in-store returns and vice versa. And then one of my favorite ones, because being a data nerd, I love the whole Internet of Things, quantified self movement. So I have a couple examples that I can go into about kind of web-connected devices, how to use it, and then same thing with back-end applications. Really using it to understand how applications are performing, how chats are happening, and how things like that. So I think I have 2 examples that I can show you to give more context around what kind of data you can send to Google Analytics.
Just to relate this to a learning context, so I think the thing here to underline is, if I just jump back to the previous slide, you see one of the things that you can collect within the measurement protocol is a client ID. So if you've got a user login or something like that, or something in your database that identifies a student but isn't identifiable to the student, so not their name, then you can pass that into the measurement protocol. And I think the big thing here is that you get a continuity. So you can be using Google Analytics on a site, and you can pass in the client ID, or you might have something offline. So you might have a paper submission system, and as long as you can hit a URL with some data, then you can record that into your Google Analytics pot of information and do something with it. So start building, as Nico mentioned, do look at how the engagement is shaping out.
Yeah, and this is one I think similar to learning analytics. I built this for my team's internal system, and these two examples are really to kind of to get you thinking about like really what you could do. They're kind of crazy out there examples, but I usually whenever I talk about analytics like to use the far-fetched ideas, because if it's one of those ways of thinking, if I could do this all the way out here, then something close to home is going to be really easy, and usually that's the case. So one example of kind of building it into like a chat system is, I don't know if anyone there uses the Slack app, but it's a great communication kind of group chat app. I built a bot using just a Node.js and Google Analytics to basically parse the message strings and pull out certain things. So we have some clients on there. We can see on average how often clients ask questions, judging, as assuming they use question marks, what times of the day they use questions, and then some more of the fun ones also, like emojis and exclamation points. But we can also see word count, letter count, and then make our own metrics of the amount of words per post, the amount of letters per word per post, and really understand kind of how the team dynamic is, and to make sure that our whole team was actually using this app. Since we were paying for it, we wanted to make sure that it wasn't just another communication chat app that we would spend a bunch of money on and then it would die off after 6 months. We saw a big uptake of the whole team consistently using this application, and kind of gave my CEO and the executive team kind of the extra data, extra information to say that, all right, this is a good investment. So, I mean, to push this on a learning kind of side, a lot of chat applications also have kind of APIs that you can tap into and really be able to collect those real-time message strings and analyze them for certain things, maybe for certain types of questions or topics, content, to really see what are these decisions about. And also, it's a lot easier to really collect that data and then blow it up and look at it in tag crowds, things like that, to see what are the overall questions that people are asking, or what are the things that people are chatting about in our systems. You can go to next slide. And this is just to show you an example of, so on the side we have our channel names. As like I said, we're an analytics company, so we have Adobe products, Google products, Team Weekly, and water coolers are our fun chat. And then over top we have the different metrics. So total events is the total amount of messages sent. Emoji, which is kind of one of the funner metrics I've made. Exclamation points, word count, and ellipses, to really show. And these ones we don't have any of the client kind of specific metrics, but this will give you an idea that in this easy interface, someone on the technical team could set this up, but anybody can view it and analyze it and drill down and really understand how kind of these things are going. The next slide. And to keep with Google Analytics PII rules, we didn't want to send any real names or anything like that to Slack or to Google Analytics, so we used just the Slack user ID. And then in another system, we can match that up, and that's totally fine. We just can't have that information matched up in Google Analytics. So I have all this data being pumped to actually a Google Sheet, and then that gets all matched up with the names. So it's easier for people to kind of view the reports on an individual level if needed. But as you can see, all the same kind of users by these common metrics. And this and my other project are all free on my blog. I open source them and put all the code out there, so if anybody wants to have fun with it. And then this next project was one of the first ones I did that kind of got me into the GDE program. Really, like I said, I'm a quantified self kind of junkie, and this is when I've used Raspberry Pis, which are little microcomputers, and Arduino boards, or Arduino boards. You can use either one, and common sensors to basically send data to GA. Go to the next slide. And basically, this is a full motion sensor that collects data in Google Analytics, built for $60 from scratch, that people can use. And as my first test was tracking my sleep patterns. Go to the next you can see how I slept that night and where I rolled around, where I moved. And this is, like I said, more of a fun example. But as Martin pointed out, if you have any of these other systems that might have physical interactions, things like that, you can easily tie Google Analytics into it based on the service. So if someone types in their maybe school ID or something along those aspects and turn something in, that's easy to also track and to be sent to GA and tie everything together to that one anonymous user ID. And like I said, if anybody wants more information about this, at the end I think we have our blogs that has all that stuff on. Next slide.
Yeah, let's move on. Yeah, so I remember now. So so if you haven't got so say for example your student information system records exam marks or something like that, but it's not linked into other systems, then it's quite easy, just from something like a Google spreadsheet to push that data into Google Analytics and do something, if that's what your question is asking. If someone's watching X number of videos, what grade do they get at the end of it? One note of caution within all this is that as learning analytics has evolved over the last couple of years, the initial focus was very much on just counting stuff, and really what the research is beginning to show is that counts don't really much if they're not associated to something. So what sort of cognitive behaviors are you looking for, that sort of thing. So that really kind of adds to what you want to try and achieve within Google Analytics. So we've mentioned a couple of times this term API, and I'm not sure how familiar you're with this concept, but essentially APIs are ways for us and other programs to interface with other programs. So, for example, all this data is potentially sitting within Google Analytics, and with a couple of lines of code, we can actually write something that can query that data and get it back out to us. Which then opens up this opportunity in terms of trying to contextualize what this data actually means. Google Analytics actually has a whole host of APIs. So it categorizes them into two categories. So in terms of using Google Analytics in a scalable and sustainable way, you can actually, there are APIs that allow you to administer and set up Google Analytics accounts. So there are restrictions within Google Analytics around the number of accounts and the number of viewers that can have access to an account. But this really starts tying us into this whole idea of providing the connection to the data. I think it's very easy for people who have access to Google Analytics accounts to blanket say, no, you can't have access to this. there is actually control within the Google Analytics web interface to do this, to start giving people view access. And you can also do it using these APIs. So you can start, if you want to scale this up, start writing programs that can distribute. If someone is a tutor on a course, then they get access to this Google Analytics account. So that starts allowing you to scale up the administration and also the reporting as well. So Google Analytics, if you've got an account and you've experimented with the web interfaces, it's quite a rich environment to start generating different views and getting different segmentations of data, and there's different charts and graphs that you can apply to that, and you can export the data out. What the API allows you to do is do this in a more replicable way, for multiple accounts. So you might come up with a particular pattern or method for looking at the data that you then want, everyone in your institution to use. And really, I think the API is a good way to go down and get this. Is anything you want to add on that, Nico?
No, I think that's pretty much it. I think that's where the real robust, the real kind of robust side of it is all their APIs, whether it's the reporting ones, the real-time APIs, all those things of really kind of taking advantage of them and not just stopping at the user interface.
So I appreciate it can be quite daunting, if you're not familiar with APIs and this whole world of bits of code. But actually, there are lots of tools emerging now that make this a lot easier as well. So, for example, the Google Analytics team have created an add-on, and there are a couple of add-ons now for Google Sheets that lets basically remove a lot of this kind of code jockeying and provide a very simple interface for you to select the data that you want out from your Google Analytics account and push a button, and it just dumps it into a spreadsheet. And I think spreadsheets shouldn't be underestimated in terms of an analytic tool. There are a whole host of different formula and query that you can apply to data, and you can get some basic graphs out. And I think it's a really good environment for rapidly prototyping what it is you want to do with your Google Analytics data. And Nico's actually got a very good example of what you can do in terms of querying the data out of Google Analytics into a Google spreadsheet, and he's got some examples there. We'll share the slides at the end so you can get a link to this and you can have a play for yourself. Is there anything you want to add on to that?
Yeah, I think that, and also I will 1,000 times plus one that comment about it's great for rapid prototyping and quick data. Most of what I build my dashboards in, I've built them in Tableau, in R, in all these different kinds of systems. But like, I still go for the most part to Google Sheets, pull them this way, build reports, build all that, because there's so much that I think, from my experience working with people, don't know what they don't know yet, or the unknown unknowns kind of idea of, you build this and then more questions come up, which is great. We want questions. But, the first dashboard is just going to open more questions. And then by the end, you're going to have something that's going to be different, and then you can build that, work with the team to build a solid dashboard for, management or anybody else. But I think I use this all the time for enterprise level clients. Because of the interactions. And if you think of a spreadsheet, the way it was built is with all these different cells and being able to reference other things, you can really build just something as interactive and dynamic as these other platforms.
And that's a great way if you've got other data sources. Google Sheets. It can do like import CSV files. So you can start mashing up data sets together as well. The other thing that is quite often an issue in terms of scaling up stuff is this distribution of data to the people that need it. And there's actually a couple of ways to do this using the Google Analytics API. So a couple of years ago, I came up with this, back to my experience using Google Drive and AppScript. I wrote this script that would let admins, instead of giving people access to the web view, they could develop queries for the data, which they would just enter into a Google Sheet, and then the script would automatically run and distribute the data to whoever needed it. So it could email the data to someone, it could drop it into a Google Drive folder so that they had access to it. So, you know, it's this idea of keeping fresh data to the people that need it. So, you know, it removes some of the headaches with the access issues. And shortly after I wrote this post, the Google Analytics team came up with something else very similar called the Super Proxy, which runs in Google Cloud. So again, this is a way that, you know, if you're investing resources into developing a learning analytics solution around Google Analytics, that you can scale it up. This isn't an issue. And if people say it is, send them to me, and I'll show them how it is differently. So continuing this idea of, you know, how do we make Google Analytics and learning analytics more scalable? So one of the things to highlight is the Google Tag Manager. So in the previous examples, we've shown you, for example, the MCQ or the video player. That required extra code onto your web page to send that information to Google Analytics. In some situations, that's just not, you know. So if we buy into this notion of continual refinement, going into web pages and updating libraries of code, and if you're using a VLE, perhaps being able to do that just isn't really, I think, achievable on scale. And this is where Google Tag Manager comes in. So Google Tag Manager basically lets you do Google Analytics integration plus a lot more, but it lets you control it from basically a web interface. So you can start developing stuff in the web that is deployed onto your websites, and you're not having to update code on your websites. You're doing it in the cloud, so you can get this idea of continual refinement. So if you discover some of your data is missing, so there are events that you want to track on the page that you're not, you can go to the Google Tag Manager. You can update how that's set up, and we'll go quickly over that in a second, and it will update across all the sites that you've got that embedded. So this, sorry again, back to a bit of code. So, but I just want to kind of underline this. So the top bit is, when we're doing Google Analytics tracking, you have to include some tracking code in all the pages. Plus, then you might have to include additional JavaScript code to push events into Google Analytics. With the Google Tag Manager, we still need to insert a piece of code onto every page, but we only need to do that once. And after that, we can just use the cloud interface and update what it is we want to do on that page. And there's a ton of stuff that you can do. So this is Nico's area of expertise. So Nico, over to you.
So as Martin said, like basically Google Tag Manager allows you to deploy these third-party scripts, like for Google Analytics, other kinds of tracking or optimization scripts that would be kind of working through your system. Also, any kind of players or any other APIs that you'll be using, you can send everything through Google Tag Manager. It doesn't just work with analytics. And give you a very high-level overview of it is it kind of consists of three parts. There's tags, there's triggers, and variables. And tags are the individual things that, let's say for Google Analytics, we'll use that example, things you want to track. So it would be like a page view, an event, something along those lines. Then you need to tell the Google Tag Manager when to fire this tag. And that might be, okay, on this page that says complete, on the end. Or it might say when you click on this button. And then when it sends that information, you can store information in variables. And that's just things like the URL, the other saved information that you might want, other information from the website, such as a student anonymous ID, things like that. So it's just, think of it as like Lego blocks. I always try to explain it is there's just different pieces that we have to put together for it to work. We need to have the tag, then we need to tell the tag when to fire, and then what information to send. And then we go next slide. And this is the example I mentioned earlier, and it's not that complex, but we can see actually on the next slide. This is how I did it with no code, all with Google Tag Manager. So I kind of have the information that we're sending, and then we have that we're sending down the side on the long screenshot, and then this edit trigger version shows I want it to fire on click when the click ID contains B1, which is, you look up in the code, it says ID equals B1. So there is some technical parts of it. It's not a completely free IT version or system, but it really allows a lot more editing and updating and things like that for the teams.
Yeah. So there's potentially a lot, even if you haven't got a programming background, that you can do with Google Tag Manager. We actually use Google Tag Manager at our organization for other things. So it's not just Google Analytics tracking. We actually use it to modify some of the web pages that we've got archived. So it's a really useful tool to have a look at and see what opportunities are there. I won't go into detail with this example, but this is again another way of just doing the YouTube play length example done in Google Tag Manager. But what I think this example also highlights is there's a really active community that are developing recipes, and that's one of the nice things within Google Tag Manager is you can develop stuff and share it with other people really easily. So hopefully one day there'll be a very rich learning analytics community around Google Tag Manager producing stuff that we can all use. And so, and this is it just producing some real-time output. And that's something we haven't actually mentioned. Google Analytics does real-time stuff. So you can do analysis in real time, which can be useful in certain scenarios. Another thing we haven't had really, I'm conscious of time, to mention is that built into Google Analytics is this whole idea of experimenting, which I think fits in really nice within learning analytics. So if you're familiar with A/B testing, that sort of thing, you can basically set up experiments where, depending on what people do, people will be directed to a different part. Nico, do you want to do the quick explanation on experiments? I'm not doing a good job on it.
Yeah, well, it's basically you can split your traffic into like multiple groups, and you can give them different experiences. And then within that experience, those different experiences, you can watch for whatever your goals or main metrics that you want to monitor. Then the system itself, it has a statistical engine that runs through and actually will tell you when a winner has won, and that is based on statistical significance. So you can pretty much set it up and then let it run, and it will automatically divvy up traffic. It uses stat people there. It uses the multi-arm bandit approach of splitting up traffic. And then once it found a winner that is statistically significant, it sends you an email and says the contest is over, or the experiment's over, and this is the winner. Just a reminder that experiments take a lot of traffic. So if there's things that you might not be getting a lot of interaction with, it's going to take a while for the computer to find a statistical significant answer.
So a learning analytics example, which I know was actually used in Coursera, was they would with the instructional videos, they had free versions. So they had a version with just slides and the voice of the professor. They had a version with an inset of the professor in the bottom corner on constantly, and they had one that came in and out. And basically, so in terms of a scenario events, people would watch the video and then they would do a multiple choice question. And they weren't using Google Analytics for that, but they could. And that, they could have created an experiment that would have tested, performance of the MCQ against which version of the video that they saw. So that's another example of how you can link this to learning analytics. So I think we're just, you just want to rattle through, and I think Peter's quite keen to finish. So.
So this is just the whole idea that we kind of wanted to touch on is obviously we're going to give you a lot of information and to hopefully kind of know a little bit more of what's possible and where to start, because I know when learning something new or exploring a new piece of technology, it's kind of like the where do I start aspect. And we hope that you kind of have a little bit more of knowing where to start and have some ideas. And then next slide. And then kind of get creative and kind of just rethink some of the interactions that you guys have with your students. And then like ask questions to yourselves about what don't I know? Like what am I not 100% sure is working with our system and with our process? And then we can really use these simple features like page views, event tracking, and other features of analytics to really get to the bottom of that. And next slide. Because as more and more things are connected, even especially in the education industry is getting more and more online based. The whole rise of learning analytics, and it's coming. By 2020, we're going to have 37 billion new devices that are going to be connected. So might as well try to get on there a little early and really set the way for the industry.
And that's us, folks. So there's our blogs, and I've published the slides on my blog, so you can see those, and there should be a recording of the video as well. Thanks for your time. Hopefully this has been useful, and we can hang around for questions if there's anything you'd like this to go over.
Yeah, thanks a lot. Sorry we ran a little bit late, but so much good information to share.
That's fine. Can you hear me?
Just about, yeah.
You can just about hear me?
Yeah.
Yeah, okay, that's good. Okay, so maybe we can ask questions. Maybe if you can hold this, Erica, and I'll turn my computer around for the guys.
Hi, Martin and Nico. This is Erica.
Hi there.
Do we have any questions from the audience? You're all absolutely blown away by the information that's available we've been presented with. And now we know what's coming in 2020. It's like we have to prepare now. Did you hear that, Martin and Nico? Howard has a question, is for 2020, how can we prepare now for what's coming in 2020?
I'd say just, start in the basics of getting these things on, like starting looking at questions or at videos or starting to add more tracking around those features to get the data. And then the more you do that, like the more you use analytics, and I know this from business side and all the things I've done is like when we start sharing more, people want more. So people want more data, and I think that usually gets more buy-in from different teams and more kind of resources when necessary. Of just kind of starting with one thing and saying, hey, look what we found, look what we discovered, and then more people are like, well, what if we did it this way, or what if we did it this way, and that kind of spreads through the team. I
think that's the key thing here, team. I think it's getting a group of you actually starting looking at this space. I think it's going to be a lot easier, particularly if you're multi-skilled. So we've talked about ways that you can avoid the code aspect of it, but there'll be points where I think right now that's unavoidable. So I think if there are people locally interested there, creating your teams, start thinking about those questions that you want to answer. One of the, I did a study of Google Analytics usage in the UK HE sector, and it was something like 97% of websites had Google Analytics tracking, but the majority of the staff have no access to it. So those conversations with the people that are currently using your Google Analytics tracking and seeing what they're doing with the data, I think are also another good starting point.
Thank you. So earlier, Nico, you said to think about the questions that you have with regards to learning analytics. So in a university environment, sometimes we hear turn everything on, turn tracking on everything. So what you're saying is possibly not everything. Think about the questions that you want answered first. Would that be more realistic?
Yeah, and that's one of those things. And when I speak at a lot of developer events, that's usually that same answer of like, oh, I'll just write a program to track everything. But then you get everything, and it's too much information to really understand, and it's too much information to really build, really know what your analysis is, what your end goal is. For instance, I mean, we could track a YouTube video every second, but does it need to be like? Is it really going to be that much more that we track every second versus beginning, middle, and end, or every 5 seconds, or things like around the different buttons or the different MCQs that people might be filling out? It might give you, unless you kind of have an idea of where you want to end, that is the best way to start with the collection, because you're actually going to do something with the data. I've worked with some people who more on the give you a frame of reference, like more on the consulting side, but it's like they won't do an analysis for you unless you tell them what you're going to do with the data. That's kind of like a encouraging thing to say, like, yeah, I can pull these numbers, but what's going to happen? And I think that's going to be the big thing of acting on this data. And when you're tracking everything, it's really hard to act on the data because it's overwhelming. What do you think, Martin?
Yeah, having that focus, I think as well in terms of institutionally, you've got to show the fruits of your labor, and if you've just got a ton of stuff and no answers, then that's not going to get you much further. There's actually quite a nice talk on from the ALT annual conference from Rebecca Ferguson on scaling up learning analytics, and so there's a couple of frameworks that she talks about, which provide you a structure in terms of how you go about this and start engaging the stakeholders as well from an early stage.
Yeah, because at the end of the day, it's in a way we don't care about data, we care about answers. That's the thing that's gonna help us.
Thank you. I'll ask the audience again. Are there any questions? Yes. Okay, we have a question about ethics and privacy.
Yeah.
Very general question. What are your thoughts on ethics and privacy with learning analytics in a university environment?
I think this is a very good point. So when I talk about learning analytics, this is something that I'm quite keen to highlight. So the Open University have actually done quite a bit of work in this area, and they actually have a policy documents for students that say what they will do in terms of data collection, what they will do with that data. So I can provide links for that. So that's a very good starting point. I think also the way I see this as well, if you're implementing any solution, be it Google Analytics or whatever else, I think it's a wonderful starting point for a conversation with students about the wider efficacy and privacy issues on the web. I think it's very valid to let students know just how many footprints they're leaving across the web, and giving them more ownership about how, if they want to, go use an incognito browser, or to not use cookies, which is a way of tracking across websites. So I think it's actually a great conversation starter, and I think engaging students in that conversation is a key point of that. If we lose people in data breaches or any privacy issues, I think it's potentially going to ruin a whole research field which can do so much more for learning and teaching. I think that'd be a real shame.
Thank you. Was there another question? Yes. We have a question from the audience about sequential analysis, and if you can provide us with an explanation about what that is.
Yes, so I found that a lot of people, when we start getting into it, they want to know, all right, how many people do X, and then how many people do Y. So there's ways that you can set up some different filters, and also ways that you can set up the kind of the tracking to really be able to get those answers for you. And we could see things like how many people watch greater than 50% of the video, and how many questions did they get right, or how many people watch 50% of the video, and what was their final score. Things like that we can start tying together a sequence of events that happen that, once again, are going to be easier to kind of understand and test against, instead of saying, how many different combinations of things could happen, and then let's run all of them and then get tiny percentage points for everything. It's kind of looking at the sequence of events that we think happen, and we think that are the right ones, and see if our hypothesis was correct or not. An obvious one, like I said, is people who watch all the videos are going to do better. So looking at the data in that way.
Great, thank you, Nico.
Mm-hmm.
All right. I think that's the questions for today. Thank you so much, Martin, and thank you so much, Nico, for your time and effort pulling this together for the folks here at RMIT. It's been really informative. We've really enjoyed the conversation, and my introduction to you was very good. So
Brilliant.
no, you couldn't hear it, but it did showcase your talent. So thank you so much. And if there's no more questions, we really appreciate your time. Peter or Howard will be in contact with you to follow up. So thank you so much.
Sure.
Great. Thanks
Thank
for
you
having
very much.